So I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just writing the script for the next video for Trauma Free Nation. And I look up and it's 1:25. Oh my God. So I'm like, I have live in 5 minutes. So here I am. I didn't even have my social light set up. I've used a brighter light and I'm seeing it's making a weird shadow. I'm gonna fix that. Okay, that's better. Okay, so I'm gonna wait a few minutes while the people who are gonna show up to this live are gonna show up. I know it takes some time and I haven't been doing many lives. This is only the second one in my plan to be making live videos every Friday at 1:30 Pacific time. So if you're watching this on replay, let me know that. And if you have questions for other live videos that you would like, I talk about trauma, I talk about healing trauma, talk about my own history with trauma and why I'm doing this work. Lots of nuances. You know, when you are a trauma survivor yourself and have healed, like I have, and work as a therapist, like I do, you become very familiar with lots and lots of nuances of how to heal. And so, Amanda in the sky, hello, hi, nice, thanks for coming. So I was just saying that we learn when we're trauma survivors and a therapist, lots of nuances about healing trauma. And so I'm coming on every Friday at 1:30 to do lives about those nuances. Hi, thank you for being here. And today, the nuances that I'm talking about are around crying, because we get lots of messages growing up and we internalize those messages to ourselves that crying isn't okay. It's a sign of weakness. It's something that actually is undesirable. It shows a lack of control. And it's actually not true. Crying is a major tool for healing. But where I differ from other therapists when I talk about healing and crying is that I don't think that it's all 100% about the catharsis experience. What I mean is, like, when you go talk to a therapist about your trauma, many times they want you to talk about the details of the trauma so you can get into the emotion of it and then cry and have all of that emotion come out, and that crying itself is supposed to be healing. I don't think it's true. I think that crying could actually be a sign that we are re-triggered and that the triggering is being reinforced by the telling of the story. So I want to explain a little bit about how I look at crying and the part that crying actually has and how it feels to cry when we know that we're healing. Because the way crying feels when we're actually healing is different than the kind of crying we have when we've got all of this built up pressure and then it comes to some sort of a tipping point where we finally just let it loose and the crying happens, and then there's endorphins at the end of like a big cry and we have some release. This is not the same as that kind of crying. So let me start by talking about what I learned growing up about crying. So I if you followed me at all, then you know that my childhood history includes lots of trauma. And from about the time I was 2 years old, I know this from some of the work that I've done as an adult, that I couldn't trust my parents. And I was also any of the pictures that I see of myself, very sad, kind of withdrawn child. And yet I didn't cry. I held it in. because anytime I looked sad or upset, I would be laughed at and called names for that. So I definitely got a message that it's not okay to cry. And on top of that, the next message that I got was that crying isn't okay because, for example, I was an asthmatic child. So every time, and I was thinking about this morning, every time I cried, my parents would get scared that I was going to get sick, and that's what they say. Don't cry, you're going to get sick, right? An asthma attack. But I really think the reason that they didn't want me to cry is because the child who was being harmed in the home, having these big, like when I cried as a child, I would hold it and hold it and hold it and then have these really big kind of earth-shaking, hyperventilating cries because there was so much energy I was holding in my body because there was so much happening to me that wasn't okay. So I actually think that the reason my parents, at least my mother, didn't ever want me to cry is because when I cried like that, it kind of maybe pointed to some of the things that she should have been doing differently, right? So I learned it's not okay to cry. And I don't know, naturally, I felt, because of the relief that crying has, I felt on some level that the crying seemed organic and it seemed good for me and it seemed healthy on some level. Not a level that I could speak to, but at some level it felt right. So it wasn't until I left home and became a mom myself. I was 23 when I got married the first time and became a mom at the age of 30. I freaking cried all the time. It was the kind of crying that didn't feel like it would ever stop. So the first crying was the holding it in crying that was caused by being in an unsafe experience. The second crying, I wasn't being physically harmed, but I was in an emotionally abusive relationship where the emotional patterns, and I stayed there 14 years, the emotional patterns that I learned in my family growing up, experienced the pain, all of that stuff, was continued in my first marriage. So there, I did a lot of crying. And it was like an extension of the kind of crying that I had done as a child. Still crying, holding a lot of pain. What I learned in those 14 years with the crying was that there is something cathartic about it, and there is something helpful about it to get through when we're not exactly safe. So if you've been around a child ever who gets hurt, who's in a safe environment, children cry. And they learn crying as a relief, as a repair, and they'll do it like with vigor until it's finished, and then they go off and play again. The problem is, especially if we were experiencing trauma as a child, is that we were never allowed to have that kind of cry, right? They say, abusive parents will often say, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right? So we were taught, my feelings aren't valid, it's not okay for me to cry, if I'll cry, I'll get hurt some more. So we got lots and lots of messages about that. So learning to cry in a healthy way, learning to hold ourselves while we cry is a super, 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 super important part of the healing process. And so I'd love for you to start to learn how to cry like this. You have a part of you that's hurting, that's crying, that's in pain. And another part of you, while you're crying, is watching and holding and being compassionate. So that the cry isn't just a spending of energy, but you're compassionately holding yourself. So even while I was in my first marriage, and so I got married when I was 23 and I'm currently 55. So this is 30 years ago. When I would cry, I would just hold awareness of my need to heal. I would hold awareness of compassion and holding myself the way you would hold a small child who wants to cry. That's the kind of crying I did, like crying and going, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, you can cry. I would curl up in a ball in my bed and just cry my eyes out while watching it also and soothing myself and giving myself permission to cry. So that's one kind of crying. That's the kind of crying we do when the pain is still real, and often because it's still being reinforced. There is a second kind of crying that is an amazing kind of crying that I discovered the more I healed. So what is this? IG? My IG channel called, is it a channel? I don't know. My IG, that's what it is. It's my IG. My IG is called Trauma Free Nation. And about a year ago, I built a social network. So it's like Facebook, but it's not on Facebook. It's its own private website that is a community completely separate from any other website anywhere. It's independent, but it's like Facebook on the inside. It's a social media network. And it has groups, and it has courses, and it has news feeds like you see on Facebook. And the reason I built that a year ago is because I realized that we need to be having conversations about how to heal trauma. I, at the age of 23, once I left my mom's home, had so much internal noise and so much like active trauma that I was creating chaos around me all the time, like chaos externally to quiet the noise on the inside. I am sure that at least one therapist, who I only saw once, diagnosed me with borderline or something like that. I'm sure of it. Because I had big emotions, because trauma creates big emotions. And in all of my work that I've done with trauma survivors and all of the big emotions I've ever seen, I've never labeled anyone like that. Because childhood trauma creates this pressure cooker, just an intensive pressure cooker, of a very strong, very powerful, very hot to the touch, intense emotion. And we cannot walk around with that level of energy inside of us without doing something about it. That's why we're in pain all the time. That's why we have so much anxiety. That's why we can't sleep. That's why we can't be in close relationship with someone else without having these moments where we're not reacting in the present time, but we're reacting to something old, and our reaction is way over the top, bigger than it should be, and not about the person actually that we're with, but about something that we've been through before. It's because the body holds all of that emotion. So body holding all of that emotion also holds triggers in place. How did I discover this? Here's how. A couple of years ago, so I've been working since I was 23 since I was 30, when I realized what the trauma brain did. I'd been, if you look at my reel from last week, I talked about how I got confronted by a chihuahua when I was 30, and my trauma brain from when I was 5, having been pinned to the ground by an Australian shepherd and mauled in the face, like I still have a scar you can see. That experience made me go, oh wait, what the heck is going on? That chihuahua like time warped me back till when I was 5 and when I believed I was dog food. So from that time and over the last 30 years, I've been intensely studying how to heal trauma, because I have never believed it would be fair. I just didn't think it was fair for my life to be a continuing, ongoing suffering, for me to not be able to have a relationship that brings me joy, for me to feel limited and scared all the time, did not seem fair. And it was not acceptable to me to just allow, most survivors, when they get into trauma, I saw a post about it this morning on LinkedIn, are told, okay, try to be aware of what's going on and what's coming to you from your past and breathe. That ain't enough. It is not enough. That's step 2 of 6 steps that I share of how to heal trauma triggers. So, how to heal a trigger. There's 6 steps to do that, and that's all in Trauma Free Nation. And actually, if you follow my YouTube channel, it's in a couple of the videos there too. But we need so much as trauma survivors. Like, we have developmental gaps that didn't get filled. So, example, if we're on the playground as a child and we're not making friends because we're so preoccupied with safety, then we grow up as an adult and we don't know how to make friends with people. That's a developmental gap that's created by trauma. So Trauma Free Nation talks in there, the lessons, we fill developmental gaps. We talk about how that gap is held open by a trigger and what the trigger is and how to heal the trigger. So that's the kind of crying I want to talk about today. The kind of crying that goes with the release of a trigger. And here's how I discovered it. The first time I discovered it was with my fiance. It was 2 years ago, and I'd been working really hard to get out of my trauma responses. But the truth is, I've spent 30 years in abusive relationships. So the first one was emotionally abusive. The second one was 6 years long, and it was emotionally and physically abusive. The third, sexually abusive. Actually, there was sexual abuse in my home, and I didn't even realize it, but my third relationship recreated that same dynamic. He was traumatized too. It wasn't his fault, but there was a dynamic playing out that I played into. An emotionally unavailable partner who was way too focused on the sexual, physical side of relationship, that went way too far in terms of him trying to make up for the fact that there was no emotional intimacy. So, and that was a 14-year relationship. So all of this, and all of this time, I'm still trying to figure out when I'm in a relationship, what's real and what's not. I'm thinking that my partner's doing something to me, and I can't tell the difference between whether I'm reacting out of my trauma or if I'm actually experiencing something in my relationship that needs to be addressed, that I need to talk about my needs. I spent like the last 30 years trying to figure that out. And in all 3 of those relationships, it took me some time to finally get to the point of going, oh, this isn't the trauma. This is the problem in the relationship, but it's recreating things that I cannot continue with. Hi, Dr. Victorious. Thank you for joining. So when I look at that, when I look at all of that history and all of the work that I was trying to do, I actually figured out how to heal triggers. Such focus on what's real and what's not, what's happening right now versus what's coming from the past. I got really good at figuring it out. So a couple of years ago, I was working on a really difficult project. And what I didn't know is that the person who was showing me the ropes for that project wasn't giving all of the information. So I kept running into like this block where I was doing the work, I was trying really hard to get things done, but I kept getting stuck. Now, this content creator did this on purpose so that you would find the gaps and think it was you, and then spend $3,000 to spend a week with her in Australia. And it wasn't right. Hi, Laura Donna, thanks for joining. That wasn't a right, not an ethical thing for her to do. But every time I was trying to do this project, I would get stuck, and then I would go into triggered behavior. And for me at the time, the triggered behavior, I joke about it being the hamburger solution, but it wasn't a hamburger solution. It was me like going and sort of like drowning myself in roasted salted nuts. And it took about 2 weeks for me to figure out what was really going on. and what I was doing with that, and how do I stop myself from eating these nuts and not getting stuck in the project. And the truth is that I came against a belief that came from my childhood, that when I was a child and I will let you into the live video in just a second when Lord Donna, when I finish this explanation, I will be happy to let you in. So I struggled with this and I kept moving forward trying to figure it out. And finally I realized, as a child, I had been told by my parents, you can't do that, it's too hard for you. So I was sickly, and they were afraid all the time that if I did something that I thought was fun, it was gonna make me sick. So here I was bumping against this block from this content creator here as an adult, and every time I got stuck, in my head, you can't do this, it's too hard for you. And I'd go straight to the triggered behavior activity that my parents had taught me, which was eating instead of feeling the feelings and figuring out what to do. So long story short is I actually started targeting and focusing that very subtle message. And that's where my 6 steps to heal a trigger came from. And it's been very successful. I share it with my private clients. I share it in Trauma Free Nation. And those 6 steps have actually helped me progressively and much faster heal triggers and let them go. And it's done the same for my clients. It's done the same for people who've used the 6 steps for anything. It works for anything, because really any bad behavior, any behavior we don't like, is likely triggered by something in the past and a misdirected attempt to make ourselves feel better. So, all of that to say, I'd already figured out the 6 steps. I was already practicing them regularly. And then I meet this magnificent man who's had his responses to me were beautiful. He was very kind and patient and loving. He was present like I'd never seen before in my life. And we were standing in the hallway, and he had his arms around me and said something to me and then gave me a kiss. And I experienced this bubble of something that like just came up from my body, and it created tears for like a minute. Like it was a very quick cry, not a big cry, but a quick cry. And whatever it was that I had held in my body for all of that time about not feeling safe in relationship was gone. And I suddenly knew I was safe in relationship. It was a cry that let go of the energy I was holding in my body that told me that relationships couldn't be safe for me. Okay, I'm going to give you a different example. The different example is I grew up in, and you know, some people love the church, some people love that church, but I grew up Mormon. And for me, it was an extension of the abusive dynamic, because they teach you to say yes and to be loyal to the church and the prophet and the leaders above anything else. And my interpretation of that was to be loyal to the church above even loyalty to myself. To be loyal to the church, and at some point in time there I would start getting communication from God about what was right for me, and then the church leadership would tell me something different. And it started happening over and over again. And I had to leave the church. I just had to leave the church. So, but I had been a pillar in the community. I had been a true blue Mormon. And I left it in 2009, I left the church. It's been so much time. I can't believe how much time has passed. But I left the church, and about 2 years ago, I found a spiritual path that put no one in between me and God. I found a spiritual path that actually helped like bring the struggles of being in that church out, so that I wasn't feeling that same pain anymore. And so, hi Paulina. And so I after I left that church, I left something that I felt was absolutely crucial to my well-being. I had put together my relationship with God and my spirituality and made it about Mormonism. So between 2009 and about 2 years ago, about 10 years, right? I was searching for a spiritual path. I couldn't find it, but then I found this path. And so one of the ways for me that extra energy that is held in my body by triggers, by trauma, shows itself is, and it's not happening as much anymore. If you look in my Trauma Free Nation YouTube channel, there's the videos about the ready for fight or flight state. And I've learned how to work on it so that I'm not always in ready for fight or flight, but most trauma survivors are. So it's something we have to be looking at consistently. But before I calmed that down and was working on it every day, I was waking up at 3:30 in the morning. Yes, Lord Donna, I see your request. I am going to let you in. I would wake up at 3:30 in the morning with some kind of energy there that wouldn't let me sleep. So I had a pattern. Wake up at 3:30 in the morning, I can't sleep. I know that a bath with magnesium flakes is going to help me get back to sleep, a hot bath. So I got in the hot bath, and this was after I discovered the new path. And I got in the hot bath, and then suddenly I became more and more aware of the betrayal, the sense of loneliness, and the sense of loss that I experienced as a Mormon, that I'd been holding in my body and still holding in my body while I was searching for a new spiritual path. But now that I had found it, it was ready to release from my body. So there in the bathtub, I cried really hard for like 30 seconds, and then it was gone. All of the angst, the pain, the fear connected to that trigger. So based on this explanation, triggers are held in our body, right? So we can cognitively process it, but they're also held in our body by emotional energy. And once we heal that trigger, right? So in this case, the healing of the trigger was finding a new spiritual path that actually worked for me, where I could feel God without putting anybody in between. That release caused a secondary release in my body, where I cried to let that piece of it go, and then it was gone. And the thing about this kind of cry that you have to understand is that, you know how it feels when you have to pee really bad for a long time and then you finally go and it gives you such a relief? It's that kind of feeling. That kind of cry doesn't hurt. It's not, hi, Miss Davis. Nice to see you. It's not a painful cry. It's not a cry that you wish would stop. It literally comes up like a bubble. And once it's out and you give it the energy, it's gone. It feels like peeing. So if you think about when we pee, we're getting toxins out of our body. When we release these emotions out of our body by these bubbles, it's like releasing toxins, emotional toxins, through our eyes. That's what it is. That's what it feels like. So, and it feels good. So when I was standing in the threshold in the hallway with my now fiance, and that bubble came up because I knew I was safe, and I cried for like 30 seconds, it felt good. It didn't feel scary. It didn't feel scary to him. It was like oh, there's a bubble. Okay, that one's released. I mean, and you know it when it happens. But to get to that point, you have to know how to heal the triggers, and you have to do it consistently. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Loredana has asked to join. I hope she's still here. I'm going to click and let her in because I'm sure she has a question. So let's do that. And if any of you, as you're listening, have questions, I'm happy to answer them. That's why I'm here. Oh, two of you have joined. Okay, I'm going to let Loredana in to let her join first, and then Miss Margaret, I will have after I've answered Loredana's question. I said yes, and then let's see. I don't know how to do this. Oh, I hear you. Okay, wait. Are you there? Hi.
Hi,
Hi, nice to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And
Good.
you?
Good, I'm good. Thank you. I'm good. It's been really
So,
wonderful to watch you grow. So let me know what question you have.
the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD,
Okay.
please.
Yes, yes, there is a huge difference. So do you want to stay on while I answer, or do you want to, what do you want to do?
I can leave.
So
I can go
is
out.
is there a button that lets you do that?
Um, this is pretty new for me.
Me too.
Let me see.
So I'm going to answer. I'll let you sit there if you have more questions. There you, I don't know what's happening. There, you're still there. So the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. So PTSD happens after we've had a discrete event. So one thing that happens. So, and it's usually a life-threatening event, and it's something unexpected and something that we were helpless to change. So like being in a car accident or having a family member, somebody close to you, get hurt in a way that you couldn't predict or defend against. That is a one-time event that's sort of out of the blue, and it will bring the flashbacks and the beliefs and usually guilt about why didn't I do something different, and um, all of the PTSD symptoms, but it's usually discrete. And it actually, when that happens, we can respond to it in a way that helps us heal. So, for example, on September 11th in 2001, when the Pentagon was hit by a plane, the plane hit my favorite aunt's office, and she was there. So I lost my aunt. And so then my PTSD symptoms showed up as every time a plane went overhead, my irrational brain said, they got my aunt, they're going to get me. So wherever I was driving, if a plane went overhead, I would have a flashback, feel unsafe, think about the loss, and go, okay, they're going to get me too. That's PTSD. I healed that by recognizing that it wasn't rational, recognizing there's no way that plane is going to come for this car right now. Like, recognizing, okay, there are parts of this where my brain is like going a little crazy, but this event is over. It's not going to recreate itself. Okay, one time event. Complex PTSD happens usually in childhood. It can happen in the context of a adult relationship that's abusive, although we don't usually stay in abusive adult relationships unless we've had trauma in childhood. But in childhood, when we're not getting our needs met and we're being hurt consistently, then we get this layers of like hundreds and hundreds of events that are like neutral, tiny things, like maybe a look on someone's face or the tone in their voice or a certain task where that thing by itself would be just PTSD. But when we put 100 of them together, now our brain has been so conditioned by our experiences to believe that life isn't safe and there is danger around every corner. That's what we call complex PTSD. So the healing of it requires healing one trigger at a time, and really backing up and looking at what we believe about the world, ourselves, and relationships that maybe isn't true but feels like the truth. Lies that feel real because they're in our body and they have big emotion connected to them. All of that, and that they usually change the way we interact with the world, and not in such a healthy way. They change the way we interact in the world in the direction of, what do I need to do to keep myself safe, even if we're already safe? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Do you have any more questions?
No, no, I'm
Okay.
fine. Thank you for
Good.
your
Okay.
help. I'll let the
Good.
other people
Yeah,
make
sure.
questions.
Yeah, I have
Bye.
one other person. I just don't know how to do it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi. Let me see if I can figure it out. Hmm. Oh, she was able to leave. Okay. So, Miss Margaret, are you still here? I can't see. Hold on. It's funny how we try to live without glasses. There we go. I think I let you in. Margaret, if you're still here. Oh, I hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, you can hear me?
I can hear you. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. I
Good.
have, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Um, so yesterday, a lot has been going on everywhere. But yesterday I read this story and I can't get away from it. And it was a happy story. It was about an Olympian who was an Olympian diver who was adopted and obviously has a great life. He's, at the Olympics. But the story touched me very deeply because I think it triggered my abandonment
Mm.
from my childhood. And I kind of answered that in something in a post that you did this morning. But ever since yesterday, I mean, it's really crazy because I keep crying about it.
Mm. Yeah. So I got goosebumps. So when you keep crying about what the Olympian said, or
You know what? If it was a warm story, a happy story with great outcomes, right? But for some reason, it triggered the adoption part of it, I guess. I don't know if it's the adoption part or the fact that he got a good family, a good parent,
mm,
you know,
mm,
but, and I didn't have one. So perhaps all of it together.
yeah.
Um, I can't quite explain it. I hope I'm making sense to you.
Yeah, you are making sense to
Okay.
me. So one of the things I've just got goosebumps like all over. One of the because I understand what it's like to have something touch you and not sure why and still crying and
Mhm.
crying and crying. But what I will say is that when something is ready to be healed, it often shows up like that. Like, right? Like we'll have tears and like the tears don't make sense until we stop and say, okay, wait, how does this response make sense inside the context of my own body history? So
Right.
I don't know if you were watching earlier when I talked about like the pressure cooker that our feelings create when we've had lots of trauma,
Yeah.
right? So, and all it
Mhm.
waits for is some tipping point to like open a sieve that will like start letting energy out.
Mhm.
So there's something in particular about that story and him getting a good family and something that you missed that is either triggering grief for you
Mhm.
or triggering something that you need to look at. I will tell you that every time we've been through something hard, we have to grieve the difference between our life and what really happened and what we wish we could have had. And it sounds like that story like gave you a grief opportunity to say, yeah.
Yeah, I think something because I mean, I I read the story and I thought, oh, how wonderful for him. It's great. And look at him now and all of that. So it was very positive, but it didn't feel good to me. It made me sad. And as you can tell, I'm still crying
Mhm.
about it,
Yeah.
which
You
is
know what I would
crazy.
No, it's not crazy. It makes perfect sense. It's not crazy. So that's the thing to know. It's not crazy. And the second thing I want you to know is that it would be really good for you to sit down with your inner child and let her talk to you. And that might sound crazy, but what I'm talking about is asking her to write you a letter from her pain, right? At the very beginning of this live, I talked about sitting with my tears when I used to cry so much letting myself cry, and the other part of myself sort of watching and holding the part of me that was crying, like hugging yourself, kind of,
Yeah.
right? And whenever I've experienced like grief that comes up like that like smacks me in the face and there's emotion, then I draw pictures about it from my child self. I write letters from my child self, because that part of you needs your hugs.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, your live today, and even your question that you posed earlier today was so timely because um, I've been struggling ever since I read the story. Then I saw your post this morning and I answered it, and I thought, and I just came to my phone and saw that you were live, and I thought, oh, I need to get on there.
I'm so
So
glad you did. I'm really glad you did.
thank you so much for doing the live. I've been following and watching, and I'm so glad that I've been watching. Thank you.
I'm so happy. You're very welcome. Virtual hug
Okay.
to you.
Same to you.
You're
Thanks.
welcome. You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. I don't know how
So,
to do this.
I don't either.
I don't know how the other person did it.
I don't know how she did it either.
Uh,
I don't know. Wait, maybe I can push on the camera and,
let's see.
yeah, I don't know how to do it.
No, I don't think I know either.
Is there a
Yeah.
little button you can push to stop it?
Uh,
Because she stopped it. So I don't know
I
how.
know, and I'm not sure how, and I know some, and I really want someone else, if they have a question, to be able to chat with you.
So
But I'm afraid to
so if
disconnect.
we have two other people in the live right now. So if anybody
Uh-huh.
knows, push the X. That's what
X.
Laura Dada
Oh, I
says.
was afraid to push the X.
So she says, push the X. We'll see what happens. Yay, it worked. Thank you. Now I know. Then she has to come back in. I'm sure she will. I'm sure she will. So I saw there was someone else who had a question. Um, Amanda. Amanda, I'm going to bring you in. I am bringing you in. So I just pushed the request for you, Amanda, to join. And I'm just waiting a second because it seems to take a second. Yay, I'm glad it worked. Now I know too. So, Amanda, if you're still there. Amanda, trying to add you. I sent you an invite. I don't know if she's still here. Amanda, you said me too. Let's see. Oh, I hear you. I hear you. Hi.
Hello.
I'm glad you got in. Figuring out the technology is half the problem. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How can I help?
Um, well, I was experiencing like one of the questions or like what you talked about earlier about how like when we feel like we've been holding to that emotion or to that trigger for so long and then we feel it coming out, how can we realize like that was because of the trauma of the trigger?
That's a really good question. Okay, so you want to know when it comes out, how do you know for sure that it's connected to a trauma or a trigger? Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know if you've heard of the idea of mindfulness.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard.
So when we talk about trauma, for trauma survivors, usually to survive our trauma, we've had to kind of shut ourselves down emotionally to survive the situation that we're in. Because if you think about it, as a small child, like my dad ran me over with a truck when I was 2, right? So if I had like, as a 2, 3, 4, 5 year old, and my mom was beating me up, if I had been still connected to my feelings, I would have been terrified all the time. Like, these people are going to kill me. I'm like, and little kids don't usually tolerate that very well. So we learn to shut that down. And nobody really, unless we've been in therapy, nobody really teaches us how to turn that back on. But part of the healing of the trauma, part of the healing of the old triggers requires us to turn our feelings back on and start paying attention. Right? So anytime, for me, anytime I'm triggered or anytime there's a release of the trigger, it's because, Margaret, you're very welcome. Anytime there's a trauma trigger, you pay attention to this place in your solar plexus. You know where the solar plexus is? No? It's, I'm going to point. I'm in super casual. It's here, right? So it's right where your rib cage comes together in the front. Okay? So if you if you close your eyes and pay attention to that part of your body, you can't really zip it open and see what's in there. But if you pay close attention, there's usually some kind of movement. And that kind of movement is connected to a feeling. And most of the time, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time, if we pay attention to that feeling, it gives us information. Okay? So getting to the place where you can understand what trigger is connected to what tears, it requires practice at paying attention to that part of your body and listening so that when feelings come up, you know what it's about.
Okay.
Yeah? So I just encourage you to just practice it and practice it. For people who have struggled with trauma, I say practice every day. The most ideal thing for us to heal our long-term trauma, and I've been able to achieve this, I know it's possible, is being connected to that part of your body all the time.
Right in between the rib cage, that middle part.
Right at the bottom, you know, right at the bottom of your sternum, like several inches above your belly button. When you like, think of the last time you got really mad or you had butterflies in your tummy. You know, that place, start learning to connect to it. Because when we, as trauma survivors, learning how to connect to it, that also tells us when we're triggered. It also tells us who's a person to connect to that's safe and who's not. That's how we connect with other people. So I've learned how to use that to identify what somebody who I'm sitting in the room with might be feeling. So it's really something that if we had been raised in a safe situation, we can use all the time to figure out how safe we are in our environment, but we've turned it off as trauma survivors.
Okay.
Okay? So practice.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's the X. There we go. That's beautiful. I'm learning so much here. And this is fun. So unless there are more questions, and I don't see any more, wait, let me see where I can look for questions. I've answered all the questions that came up today. And unless there are other questions, I think I might wrap up today's live. I think one of the things that I tried to do from last Friday's live, they're always in my IG stories, but I'm going to start uploading them to my Trauma Free Nation YouTube channel. And you can find it on YouTube, just Trauma Free Nation. And I'm going to upload them there as well. What else do I want to tell you? Let yourself cry. Listen to what the tears are about. It's part of the healing process. I'm so thankful that you guys have been here and had an opportunity to serve you by answering your questions. I fully believe that healing and being well and experiencing joy in life is our birthright. We just need somebody who can show us the path. And I'm here to show you the path, so I'm very honored that you're trusting me with this work. So I love you guys, and I'll see you next Friday, same time. I'll be live at 1:30 on Friday again. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.